Lieutenant James Mercer watches in horror as his badge and gun slide across the desk. Behind it, sits Gabrielle Washington, the woman he had demeaned and assaulted just days ago at a traffic stop. Her eyes unflinching, her voice commanding, "Clean out your desk, Lieutenant." Before we dive into this shocking story of power, prejudice, and justice, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to witness how a single traffic stop spiraled into a career-ending nightmare for one officer and became the catalyst for systemic change in an entire police department. Lieutenant James Mercer cruised through the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge, the most affluent neighborhood in Westlake, Michigan, his patrol car moving slowly as he scanned for any sign of disturbance in this predominantly white enclave. 20 years on the force had taught him that certain people just didn't belong in certain neighborhoods, and he prided himself on his ability to spot what he called irregularities. The late afternoon sun glinted off a black BMW that rolled to a stop at the intersection ahead. Mercer narrowed his eyes, noting the vehicle's immaculate condition and the silhouette of a driver who didn't match the typical Oak Ridge resident profile. When the BMW proceeded through the intersection, Mercer flipped on his lights, already reaching for his citation book. The BMW pulled over promptly, tires precisely aligned with the curb. Mercer approached with his right hand resting on his holstered weapon, a habit he never broke even for routine stops. He watched as the driver's window glided down, revealing a black woman in her early 40s wearing a tailored blazer, her hair styled in neat locks pulled back from her face. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Mercer demanded without preamble, not bothering with the courtesy of explaining the reason for the stop. The woman retrieved the documents from her glove compartment with deliberate movements. "May I ask why I've been pulled over, officer?" she inquired, her voice calm and articulate. Mercer scanned her license. Dr. Gabrielle Washington, 42 years old, an address in Riverdale, one of the few integrated neighborhoods in Westlake. "You ran that stop sign back there," he stated flatly, though the accusation was fabricated. Gabrielle's expression remained composed, but her eyes reflected clear disagreement. "Officer, I made a complete stop. I always do, especially in residential areas," she responded, her tone respectful yet firm. "If there's dash camera footage, I'm certain it would confirm that." Something about her confidence, the way she held his gaze without fear or deference, triggered an immediate surge of irritation in Mercer. Who was this woman to question his authority? His jaw tightened as he glanced at her occupation listed on the license: neurologist at Westlake Memorial Hospital. Another one of those educated types who thought their degrees put them above the law. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he ordered, his voice taking on the hard edge that usually made civilians comply immediately. Gabrielle hesitated, confusion crossing her features. "Officer, is that really necessary? I've provided all the requested documentation." Mercer's hand moved to his door handle. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." Reluctantly, Gabrielle unfastened her seatbelt and opened her door. As she stood, Mercer noted she was wearing an elegant pantsuit and low heels, dressed for a professional meeting, not for trouble. Yet something about her collected demeanor, the absence of the fear he was accustomed to seeing, fueled his growing animosity. "Do you know Police Commissioner Richards?" she asked calmly. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding here, and—" The mention of the commissioner was the match to gasoline. Mercer grabbed her arm roughly, spinning her around and slamming her against the car. "Hands on the vehicle," he growled, kicking her feet apart as he began a pat-down that bordered on assault. "You think dropping names is going to help you? You people always think you're above the rules." Gabrielle winced as her cheek pressed against the warm metal of her car. "This is unnecessary and inappropriate," she stated, her voice steady despite the situation. "I've done nothing wrong." Across the street, 3 teenagers had stopped on their bikes, phones raised, as they recorded the escalating scene. Mercer noticed them, but didn't care. He'd faced dozens of civilian complaints over the years without consequence. He twisted Gabrielle's arms behind her back, cuffing her wrists tight enough to leave marks. Then, as he leaned close to her ear, a glob of saliva formed in his mouth. With deliberate contempt, he spat the spittle landing on her cheek and sliding down to her jawline. "That's what I think of your connections," he hissed as Gabrielle closed her eyes, her dignity under assault along with her body. The sound of another patrol car approaching broke the moment. Officer Diego Rodriguez, a 5-year veteran of the force, stepped out and surveyed the scene with visible discomfort. "Everything okay here, Lieutenant Mercer?" he asked, his gaze moving between Mercer and the handcuffed woman whose professional attire and calm demeanor clearly didn't match the treatment she was receiving. "Just another entitled Riverdale resident who thinks stop signs are optional," Mercer replied, roughly guiding Gabrielle toward his patrol car. "Watch her vehicle while I run her information. I've got a feeling we might find something interesting." Rodriguez's expression betrayed his uncertainty, but he nodded, conditioned to defer to the senior officer. Once Gabrielle was secured in the back of the patrol car, Mercer returned to her BMW, pulling on latex gloves with theatrical slowness. He methodically searched through the vehicle, lingering on her briefcase, filled with medical journals and patient files. Finding nothing incriminating, his frustration mounted. From his pocket he withdrew a small plastic bag containing marijuana, his insurance policy for difficult arrests. With practiced movements, he wedged it under the driver's seat, making sure it was visible enough to justify a discovery, but hidden enough to be plausibly missed by the driver. Back in the patrol car, he drove Gabrielle to the station, ignoring her composed questions about the charges and her right to a phone call. At the precinct, Booking Sergeant Thomas Kelly looked up from his desk with bored eyes that suddenly widened when he saw who Mercer was bringing in. "Lieutenant," he acknowledged, then turned his attention to Gabrielle. "Name for the record, ma'am." Gabrielle met his gaze steadily. "Dr. Gabrielle Washington. I'd like to make a phone call, please." Kelly began the intake process, his movements mechanical, until his desk phone rang. The conversation was brief, but whatever was said caused a visible change in his demeanor. He glanced at Gabrielle with new nervous respect, then at Mercer with something approaching alarm. "Lieutenant, can I have a word?" he asked, stepping away from the desk. Mercer followed, irritated by the interruption. "What?" Kelly lowered his voice. "We need to release her, now." Mercer scoffed. "On whose authority? She ran a stop sign, resisted arrest, and I found marijuana in her vehicle." Kelly's expression hardened. "Trust me on this one. Process her out. No charges filed." Mercer wanted to argue, but something in Kelly's tone gave him pause. He returned to Gabrielle, removing the handcuffs with deliberate slowness. "Looks like it's your lucky day, Dr. Washington. You're free to go." Gabrielle rubbed her wrists, the red marks from the too tight cuffs beginning to darken into bruises. "My vehicle and personal effects?" she inquired, her composure still intact despite the ordeal. "Officer Rodriguez will drive you back," Kelly interjected before Mercer could respond. "Your car has already been cleared and secured." As Gabrielle was escorted out, Mercer watched with a mixture of confusion and smug satisfaction. He'd put another one of them in their place, reminded them of the real power dynamic in Westlake, regardless of their degrees or job titles. That evening at Donovan's Bar, the unofficial gathering place for off-duty officers, Mercer recounted the stop to a small group of colleagues, embellishing the details to emphasize Washington's attitude while minimizing his own actions. "You should have seen her face when I found that bag," he chuckled, raising his whiskey in a mock toast. "Another entitled Riverdale resident learning how things work in the real world." His audience laughed appreciatively, except for Rodriguez, who nursed his beer in silence. His discomfort evident, but ignored. None of them realized that their world was about to be turned upside down, that the woman Mercer had humiliated would soon hold their careers and futures in her hands. 3 days after the incident, an emergency assembly was called for the entire Westlake Police Department. The main briefing room buzzed with speculation as officers filled every available seat, the unusual timing and mandatory attendance fueling rumors about budget cuts, or perhaps a major case development. Lieutenant Mercer arrived late, deliberately choosing a seat near the back where he could check his phone without scrutiny. His mild hangover from the previous night at Donovan's left him irritable and disinterested in whatever bureaucratic announcement was coming. Police Commissioner Richards, a silver-haired veteran with a perpetually stern expression, stepped up to the podium, immediately silencing the room with his authoritative presence. "Officers of Westlake PD, thank you for assembling on such short notice." He began his voice carrying to every corner without need of the microphone. "Today marks a significant transition in leadership for our department. After 6 months of a nationwide search and an extensive vetting process, I'm pleased to introduce your new police chief." Mercer barely looked up, assuming it would be another internal promotion, probably Captain Anderson, who'd been functioning as interim chief since Donahue's retirement. The commissioner continued, "Our new chief brings impressive credentials, a doctorate in criminal justice, 15 years of distinguished service in the Boston Police Department, where she rose to deputy commissioner, and most recently a fellowship at the FBI National Academy specializing in community-oriented policing strategies." The use of "she" caught Mercer's attention, and he raised his eyes just as Commissioner Richards gestured toward the side entrance. "Please welcome your new police chief, Dr. Gabrielle Washington." The room fell into stunned silence as Gabrielle Washington walked confidently to the podium, now dressed in a crisp police uniform with chief's insignia gleaming on her collar. Mercer felt the blood drain from his face, his body suddenly cold, despite the crowded room. It couldn't be possible. The woman he had degraded, assaulted, and spat on just days ago now stood before them as their commanding officer. His mind raced, trying to process the implications as his stomach churned with the first ripples of genuine fear. Commissioner Richards shook Washington's hand before yielding the podium. "Thank you, Commissioner," she began, her voice exactly as Mercer remembered it, calm, articulate, and now undeniably authoritative. "For those of you who haven't met me yet, I look forward to working together to serve and protect the citizens of Westlake." Her eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting Mercer's before moving on without a flicker of recognition. "Before outlining my vision for this department, there's a serious matter we need to address." She nodded to someone at the back of the room, and the large projection screen descended from the ceiling. "Recently, an incident occurred that exemplifies the challenges we face in police-community relations." The screen illuminated with video footage, crystal clear, multi-angle recordings of Mercer's traffic stop with Washington. The room watched in horrified silence as the entire encounter unfolded. Mercer's aggressive approach, Washington's calm responses, the unnecessary escalation, the physical assault, and finally, the undeniable moment when Mercer spat on her. The footage continued, showing Mercer planting evidence in her vehicle while she sat handcuffed in his patrol car. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Every eye turned toward Mercer, whose face had progressed from pale to ashen. Chief Washington's voice cut through the tension. "What you've just witnessed represents everything that undermines public trust in law enforcement. Fabricating reasons for stops, excessive force-planting evidence, and degrading treatment of citizens. These actions are not only violations of department policy and the law, they betray the oath we all took to serve and protect." She paused, letting her words sink in. "For those wondering how this footage exists, I'll be transparent. My appointment has been finalized for weeks, but before taking command, Commissioner Richards and I agreed I should experience this department's operations firsthand, without the filter of rank or advance notice." Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, wondering about their own recent interactions with civilians. Some of you may be asking why I didn't identify myself during this encounter. Washington continued. The answer is simple. No citizen should need a badge or title to be treated with basic dignity and respect under the law. The standard of conduct I expect applies to every interaction, not just those with people you perceive as important. Her gaze swept the room again. Let me be absolutely clear, under my leadership, there will be zero tolerance for misconduct, discrimination, or abuse of power. We will be implementing comprehensive reforms, including enhanced training, community oversight, and a complete review of all open and past complaints. Officers exchanged nervous glances, the implications of her words sinking in. Many had benefited from the previous administration's tendency to dismiss or bury civilian complaints, especially those from minority neighborhoods. As Washington outlined her immediate priorities, Mercer felt physically ill. Colleagues who had been laughing with him at Donovan's just days earlier now edged away from him, the contagion of his downfall already spreading. Even his longtime allies avoided eye contact, their self-preservation instincts overriding any loyalty. As the assembly concluded, Chief Washington made a final statement. Lieutenant Mercer, please report to my office immediately. Everyone else is dismissed to their regular duties. The exodus from the briefing room was rapid, officers filing out in unusual silence, processing the seismic shift in their professional landscape. Mercer remained frozen in his seat until the room had nearly emptied. Rodriguez passed by without a glance, while Sergeant Kelly muttered, "You're on your own, man," as he hurried past. Finally, with leaden feet, Mercer made his way to what had been Chief Donahue's office and was now Washington's domain. The nameplate had already been changed. Inside, Washington sat behind the desk that now belonged to her Commissioner Richards, standing to her side. Neither invited Mercer to sit. "Lieutenant," Washington began, her tone professional rather than vindictive. "During my detainment, I was on the phone with Commissioner Richards. We made the decision to allow the incident to unfold without intervention, as it provided valuable insight into this department's actual practices rather than its stated policies." Mercer swallowed hard, his mouth desert dry. "Chief, I want to apologize." Washington raised her hand, cutting him off. "This isn't about apologies, Lieutenant. This is about accountability. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your conduct during our encounter and any previous complaints against you." She slid a formal notice across the desk, along with a plastic bag containing his badge and gun. "You will surrender your service weapon and badge now. Department property, including your assigned vehicle access cards and any files in your possession, must be returned before you leave the building today." Mercer stared at the items on the desk, the physical symbols of his identity and authority now stripped away. "This is excessive," he managed to say, his voice hollow. "It was one incident, and I didn't know—" Commissioner Richards interrupted, his voice cold. "One incident caught on camera, Lieutenant. How many weren't?" Washington's expression remained impassive. "The investigation will determine the appropriate disciplinary action. You'll be contacted with further instructions regarding the process. That's all for now." Dismissed like a rookie, Mercer collected his personal effects under the watchful eye of internal affairs officers who had materialized to escort him from the building. News of his downfall spread through the department like wildfire, and by the time he reached the parking lot, officers were already moving to distance themselves, deleting compromising text messages, and considering what they might need to explain if Washington's investigation expanded. Driving home in his personal vehicle, a 7-year-old Dodge Charger that suddenly seemed shabby compared to his department SUV, Mercer was confronted by the sight of news vans parked along his street. Someone had leaked the story, and reporters swarmed his driveway as he pulled up, shouting questions about the incident and his suspension. Pushing through them without comment, he entered his house to find his wife Jennifer in tears, her phone displaying the viral video that had somehow already made its way online. "Tell me this isn't you, James," she demanded, though the evidence was undeniable. "Tell me you didn't spit on a woman during a traffic stop." His 16-year-old daughter Madison stood in the hallway, her expression a mixture of shock and disgust. When he reached toward her, she stepped back. "Don't touch me," she whispered, before retreating to her room. As the front windows flashed with camera lights from the media circus outside, Mercer's phone rang. His union representative, whose tone made it clear that this wouldn't be a simple matter to sweep under the rug. "We've got a serious problem, James," the rep said without preamble. "More complaints against you are surfacing dating back years. People who were afraid to speak up before are coming forward now that Washington's in charge." As night fell, Mercer sat alone in his darkened living room, the foundations of his life crumbling around him. While across town, Chief Washington methodically reviewed personnel files by lamplight, already identifying patterns that suggested Mercer's behavior was just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of departmental dysfunction. The morning after the revelation, Chief Washington arrived at headquarters at 5:30, 2 hours before her scheduled start time. The building was nearly empty, allowing her uninterrupted access to personnel files and complaint records. She'd appointed Captain Maya Chen to lead the internal investigation into Mercer and the department's practices. Chen, a 15-year veteran who had faced her own battles with discrimination as one of the few Asian American women in the department, understood both the system's flaws and the resistance they would encounter. "These files have been deliberately disorganized," Chen observed, sorting through stacks of civilian complaints that had mysteriously been misfiled or marked as resolved without documentation. "Look at this pattern. Complaints against certain officers, including Mercer, consistently disappear into administrative black holes." Washington nodded, unsurprised. Former Chief Donahue protected his favorites. Pull every complaint filed against Mercer for the past 5 years, resolved or not. I want to see if there's a pattern to the types of civilians he targeted. As they worked, the morning shift began arriving, officers casting curious or hostile glances toward the glass-walled office where their new chief was clearly dismantling the old order. By noon, a disturbing picture had emerged, dozens of excessive force complaints against Mercer, predominantly from Black and Latino citizens, all dismissed for insufficient evidence or officer discretion. Chen was collating the data when a knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Diego Rodriguez stood there visibly nervous. "Chief Washington, could I speak with you privately?" Washington exchanged glances with Chen. "Captain Chen is leading this investigation. Anything you say to me can be shared with her." Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded. "It's about Lieutenant Mercer and other incidents I've witnessed." Once the door closed, Rodriguez's story spilled out how Mercer systematically targeted minority drivers, particularly in affluent neighborhoods, how he kept a small supply of drugs to plant when searches came up empty, how he coached junior officers to corroborate his reports and intimidated those who questioned his methods. "Why are you coming forward now?" Chen asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes skeptical. Rodriguez looked down. "I should have reported it before, but Mercer has allies throughout the department, including sergeants who handle shift assignments and evaluations. Officers who crossed him found themselves with the worst shifts, dangerous patrol areas, or no backup when they called for it." Washington studied him carefully. "And now," Rodriguez met her gaze, "now there's finally someone who might actually do something about it. I'm not the only one who's been silent out of self-preservation, Chief. There are good officers here who've been caught in a bad system." As Rodriguez continued detailing specific incidents, Washington made a decision. By the afternoon, Justice Department consultants had arrived to begin a comprehensive review of department policies and practices. Their presence sent shockwaves through the ranks. Officers who had operated with impunity under Donahue's leadership suddenly found their records scrutinized by federal eyes. That evening, Sergeant Thomas Kelly, who had processed Washington's booking, appeared uninvited at Mercer's home. Mercer's wife reluctantly let him in, then retreated upstairs, unwilling to associate with her husband's colleagues, after seeing the video that had now been viewed millions of times online. "What the hell were you thinking?" Kelly demanded, pacing Mercer's living room like a caged animal. "You had to pick her to go full racist on the one black woman in Westlake who could actually fight back." Mercer, disheveled and smelling of bourbon, glared at his former friend. "How was I supposed to know she was the new chief? Nobody told me anything about a replacement for Donahue being selected." Kelly slammed his hand on the coffee table. "That's not the point. The point is you got caught on camera doing what we've all been covering for you for years. And now she's bringing in the feds to look at everything. Everything, James. Do you understand what that means for the rest of us?" Mercer's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "The rest of you, what happened to having each other's backs, the thin blue line and all that." Kelly laughed bitterly. "That disappeared the moment Washington played that video. Nobody's going down with you on this. Rodriguez is already singing like a canary." Their argument escalated, voices rising as they hurled accusations and profanities. Neither noticed Madison sitting at the top of the staircase, recording their conversation on her phone, her expression hardening as she learned the true extent of her father's corruption and the systemic support that had enabled it for years. Across town, Chief Washington faced her own confrontation in City Manager Victor Hargrove's office. Hargrove, a slick political operator who had managed Westlake's administration for 11 years, made his displeasure clear. "You've been chief for one day, and you've already invited federal oversight, suspended a decorated officer, and created a media circus. This is not how we handle things in Westlake." Washington remained composed. "How do you handle things in Westlake, Mr. Hargrove? By burying complaints from minority citizens, by allowing officers like Mercer to terrorize certain neighborhoods while protecting others." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're new here, so let me explain how this works. This city operates smoothly because we maintain certain standards. Property values stay high, crime stays low, and everyone knows their place. Rock the boat too much, and you'll find your budget requests denied, your overtime allocations cut, and your initiatives mysteriously stalled in committee." As Washington drove home that night, she made a detour to Riverdale, the integrated neighborhood where she had recently purchased a home. At a small community center, she reconnected with Darius Powell, a community activist she had met during her covert evaluation of the city. Their previous encounter had been tense. Powell had seen her as just another outsider making empty promises. Now he regarded her with cautious respect after seeing how she had handled the Mercer situation. "So the new chief wants community input," Powell observed, offering her a seat in his cluttered office. "What changed?" Washington smiled tiredly. "Nothing changed. This was always my intention. But now I have the authority to make real changes, and I need allies who understand the community's actual needs, not just what shows up in official reports." Powell leaned forward. "Mercer's not an outlier, you know. He's a symptom of how Westlake PD has operated for decades. Black folks in this city know which officers to fear, which neighborhoods to avoid after dark, not because of criminals, but because of cops." Their conversation lasted hours, Powell sharing perspectives from community members who had suffered under the department's discriminatory practices. As Washington finally drove home, her phone buzzed with a notification the police union had issued a statement supporting Mercer, claiming he was being scapegoated and that the incident was being politicized by outside interests. The battle lines were being drawn, and Washington knew the real fight was just beginning. What would you do if you were in Chief Washington's position? Would you continue pushing for accountability despite the resistance, or would you compromise to avoid further conflict? Comment number 1. If you believe she should stand firm against corruption, no matter the personal cost, or comment number 2. If you think she should take a more gradual approach to avoid backlash. Like and subscribe to see how Chief Washington navigates the dangerous waters of police reform in a department resistant to change. Now, as Washington begins to uncover the extent of corruption in the Westlake Police Department, what hidden alliances might be working against her, and can she find enough allies to support her mission before those who benefited from the old system organize to bring her down? Within a week of Chief Washington's appointment, the initial shock among Westlake's officers had transformed into organized resistance. Lieutenant Mercer, though suspended, had not remained idle. From his home, he orchestrated a counteroffensive, leveraging long-standing relationships with officers still active in the department. Officer Grant Williams became his primary conduit for information, providing daily updates on Washington's activities and the progress of the investigation. Sergeant Frank Peterson, who controlled scheduling and equipment assignments, subtly ensured that officers loyal to Washington received the least desirable shifts and malfunctioning body cameras. The pushback manifested in more sinister ways as well. Washington arrived home one evening to find her mailbox stuffed with anonymous letters, some containing racial slurs. Others thinly veiled threats about knowing your place and accidents happening to outsiders. She photographed each one before sealing them in evidence bags, adding them to the growing file of intimidation attempts. Her personal information had been leaked online by unknown sources, resulting in pizza deliveries she hadn't ordered, utility cancellations, and disturbing late-night phone calls that consisted only of breathing or police radio chatter. Despite these provocations, Washington maintained her professional composure at work, never revealing how she spent her evenings installing additional security cameras around her property or the sleepless nights spent listening for unusual sounds outside her windows. The resistance culminated at a contentious city council meeting where Washington was scheduled to present her reform proposals. The council chambers were packed, the audience visibly divided between Washington's supporters, predominantly from minority neighborhoods, and a vocal contingent of officers' families and their allies. As Washington approached the podium, Officer Williams and several other uniformed officers stood in unison, turning their backs to her in a choreographed display of disrespect. Councilman Howard Barrett, whose family had deep ties to Westlake's business community, interrupted Washington's presentation repeatedly with hostile questions. "Chief Washington," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "these so-called reforms you're proposing would cost taxpayers millions. Can you explain why we should allocate resources based on complaints from a small vocal minority rather than maintaining the successful policing strategies that have kept Westlake safe for decades?" Washington responded with data, statistics demonstrating the disproportionate targeting of minority residents, the concentration of police resources in wealthy neighborhoods, while violent crimes in poorer areas went uninvestigated, the correlation between aggressive policing tactics and decreased community cooperation with law enforcement. Barrett dismissed her evidence with a wave of his hand. Numbers can be manipulated to tell any story. The fact remains that crime is low in Westlake because our police department has been allowed to do its job without political interference. He paused, his next words carefully calculated. "One might wonder if your appointment was based more on meeting certain diversity quotas rather than actual qualifications." A murmur ran through the chamber. Washington's supporters erupted in protests, while Barrett's allies nodded in agreement. Mayor Thompson, who had remained conspicuously neutral throughout the controversy, feebly called for order. Washington waited for the noise to subside, her expression revealing nothing of the fury she felt. "Councilman Barrett," she replied, her voice steady. "My qualifications include a doctorate in criminal justice, 15 years of distinguished service in Boston, specialized training at the FBI Academy, and a record of reducing both crime rates and civilian complaints in every department I've served. I'd be happy to compare credentials with anyone questioning my appointment." The meeting deteriorated further when public comments began. Darius Powell and other community advocates spoke passionately about decades of harassment and discriminatory policing, while the wives of several officers, including Mercer's wife Jennifer, tearfully defended their husbands as dedicated public servants being vilified for political gain. Washington drove home alone that night, the weight of isolation settling heavily on her shoulders. The support from minority communities was encouraging, but insufficient against the entrenched power structures aligned against her. Inside her office the next morning, Captain Chen discovered signs of intrusion. Files slightly rearranged her computer, showing logins during hours she hadn't been present. More disturbing was the disappearance of several key witness statements from Rodriguez and others who had come forward about Mercer's misconduct. "They're trying to undermine the investigation," Chen reported to Washington, "and they have access to secure areas and sensitive information." Washington nodded grimly. "Set up a separate secure server for all investigation materials. Change access codes daily. Trust no one who hasn't explicitly proven their loyalty." That evening, returning from a community meeting in Riverdale, Washington, discovered her car had been vandalized in the department parking garage, racial slurs keyed into the paint sugar in the gas tank, and all 4 tires slashed. Officer Williams happened to be nearby, offering insincere concern. "Terrible thing, Chief. Unfortunately, our security cameras in this section have been malfunctioning. No footage of the perpetrator." Washington accepted a ride home from a uniformed officer she'd brought with her from Boston, one of the few people she fully trusted. Approaching her house, she immediately sensed something wrong. The security system she'd installed showed no active lights, and her front door was slightly ajar. Drawing her weapon, she instructed her colleague to call for backup while she cleared the house. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, but family photographs had been rearranged on shelves and walls, some turned face down. Others moved to different rooms entirely. The message was clear: "We can get to you any time. Nowhere is safe." Rather than being intimidated, Washington channeled her anger into action. Working through the night, she installed hidden cameras throughout her home and office, separate from the official security systems that had been compromised. Privately, she contacted FBI agent Eliza Kennedy, whom she'd worked with in Boston, requesting assistance with potential civil rights violations within the department. "This goes beyond harassment, Eliza," Washington explained over a secure line. "There's evidence of systematic discrimination, potentially criminal misconduct, and now witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. I need federal eyes on this before they manage to bury all the evidence." Agent Kennedy promised to expedite the request, but warned that official FBI involvement would escalate tensions dramatically. The warning proved prophetic the very next day when Officer Rodriguez was found beaten unconscious in the police parking garage, a note pinned to his uniform that read simply, "Loyalty matters." Rodriguez was rushed to Westlake Memorial Hospital with severe injuries, including trauma to his face that threatened permanent damage to his right eye. Washington visited him that evening, standing silently at his bedside as machines monitored his vital signs. His mother, a small woman with iron-gray hair and deeply lined features, sat clutching her son's hand. Her eyes filled with both grief and accusation when Washington entered. "This is your fault," Mrs. Rodriguez said in Spanish-accented English. "He was a good officer. Quiet did his job. Then you came with your crusade, and now look at him." Washington absorbed the words without defense. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez. You're right that Diego's courage in coming forward made him a target. I promise you that whoever did this will face justice." The older woman laughed bitterly. "Justice in Westlake. My son and I have lived here for 20 years, Chief Washington. There has never been justice for people like us." As Washington left the hospital, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Rodriguez was first. Who's next? Chen Powell. You back off while you still can. She deleted the message after taking a screenshot for her evidence file, then called Captain Chen. Increase security on all witnesses and their families. And Maya, watch your back. This is escalating faster than I anticipated. That night alone in her violated home, Washington finally allowed herself a moment of doubt. Was the fight worth the cost. The system she was battling had decades of entrenchment allies in every corner of city government and a willingness to use violence to maintain the status quo. She poured herself a rare glass of whiskey and called Judge Walter Michaels her mentor from law school and the person who had first encouraged her to pursue a career in law enforcement. "I knew it would be difficult, Walter, but I didn't expect this level of coordinated resistance," she admitted. "They're willing to hurt their own to protect their power." Judge Michaels listened patiently before responding. "Gabrielle, remember why you took this job. Not for a title or a career advancement, but because systems don't change unless someone forces them to. If you walk away now, they win, and nothing changes. The question isn't whether the fight is worth it, it's whether you're the one who needs to fight it." 2 weeks into the investigation, the strain began showing on Chief Washington's face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and the crisp precision of her uniform couldn't disguise the weight she had lost. Alone in her office before dawn, she reviewed security footage from the parking garage where Rodriguez had been attacked, searching for details others might have missed. The official investigation, led by officers assigned by Sergeant Peterson, had produced nothing useful, conveniently corrupted video files witnesses who saw nothing evidence mishandled. Washington maintained her own parallel investigation, trusting only Captain Chen and the handful of officers who had proven their loyalty. The personal toll extended beyond physical exhaustion. Washington's carefully ordered life had dissolved into a constant state of vigilance. She varied her routes to and from work, checked under her vehicle for explosive devices each morning, and slept with her service weapon within reach. The home she had purchased with such optimism now felt like a fortress under siege. Only in rare private moments did she allow vulnerability to surface. During a medical appointment at a clinic in the neighboring town of Lakewood, where she hoped to avoid recognition, Washington received news that compounded her stress. "The biopsy results are concerning Dr. Washington," her oncologist explained, using her academic rather than police title for privacy. "The breast mass shows malignant cells consistent with stage 2 carcinoma. We need to discuss treatment options immediately." Washington absorbed this information with the same outward composure she brought to professional crises. "What's the timeline for treatment? I'm in the middle of a critical professional situation that I can't simply step away from." The doctor frowned. "Cancer doesn't care about your professional obligations, Gabrielle. Without treatment, your prognosis deteriorates significantly. We should begin with surgery, followed by radiation or chemotherapy, depending on lymph node involvement." Washington negotiated a compromise. She would schedule surgery for the following month, allowing her time to advance the department reforms to a point where they couldn't be easily reversed in her absence. She told no one about the diagnosis, not even Captain Chen, who had become her closest ally. The secret weighed on her, adding urgency to her mission. If her time was limited, she needed to ensure her reforms took root deeply enough to survive without her direct oversight. Meanwhile, Mercer's life continued its downward spiral. Jennifer had moved out, taking Madison to her sister's home in Grand Rapids. The separation papers arrived by certified mail, along with a restraining order citing threatening behavior and emotional abuse. His drinking increased, bottles accumulating in every room of the house he now occupied alone. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. The union representative visited less frequently, bringing increasingly discouraging updates about the investigation. Even Spencer Coleman, the aggressive attorney the union had hired for his defense, recommended accepting whatever deal might be offered rather than facing the mounting evidence in a public hearing. Madison's absence cut deepest. She had been Daddy's little girl, the one who had idolized him, who had once said she wanted to be a police officer just like him. Now she refused his calls and returned his letters unopened. What Mercer didn't know was that Madison had been irreversibly changed by the conversation she overheard between her father and Sergeant Kelly. The recording she'd made that night had become evidence in Washington's investigation after Madison anonymously forwarded it to the department's new ethics email address. Within the department, the pressure on Captain Chen intensified as she became the visible face of the investigation. She arrived one morning to find her desk chair slashed to ribbons, stuffing scattered across her office floor like snow. The next day, her car tires were slashed in the secure police parking area. Notes appeared in her locker, crude drawings of Asian caricatures with threats scrawled beneath. Chen reported each incident while continuing her work without public complaint, but Washington noticed the toll it was taking. The flinch when doors opened unexpectedly, the constant scanning of rooms the weapon kept closer at hand. "You don't have to stay, Maya," Washington offered during a late-night strategy session. "I can arrange a transfer to any department in the country with a single phone call. Your career shouldn't be sacrificed for this." Chen's expression hardened. "With respect, Chief, this isn't just your fight. I've spent 15 years in this department watching the same patterns of discrimination and corruption. If we don't fix it now, it may never change." The community's reaction to Washington's reforms remained sharply divided. At a forum organized by the Westlake Community Association, she faced hostile questions from both sides of the debate. Black and Latino residents demanded immediate firings of problem officers and questioned why Mercer hadn't been arrested for assault. White residents from affluent neighborhoods expressed concerns about lowered standards and politically motivated witch hunts against dedicated officers. The forum reached a flashpoint when Darius Powell took the microphone. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, Chief Washington," he began, his tone making it clear a challenge was coming. "But some folks in the community are wondering if you're really representing us or if you're just wearing the master's uniform with a different face." A murmur ran through the audience as Powell continued. "We've seen black faces in power before who forgot where they came from once they got a taste of authority. How do we know you won't compromise when the pressure gets too intense?" Washington felt the weight of centuries of justified mistrust in Powell's question. "Mr. Powell, I can't prove my commitment with words alone. Judge me by my actions and the results they produce. I'm not here to be anyone's token or to provide cover for the same old systems. I'm here to create fundamental change, and I can't do that without the community's support, criticism, and yes, even skepticism." The legal challenges mounted simultaneously. Spencer Coleman filed a countersuit on Mercer's behalf, claiming Washington had targeted him due to reverse racism and had created a hostile work environment for white male officers. The lawsuit, while legally dubious, provided ammunition for Washington's critics and a fresh wave of negative media coverage. The situation deteriorated further when an anonymous source leaked surveillance photos of Washington meeting with FBI agent Kennedy, creating accusations of federal overreach and conspiracy against local law enforcement. The pressure culminated during a department-wide briefing on new use of force policies. As Washington explained the changes, Officer Grant Williams rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "This is bullshit," he interrupted, voice echoing through the room. "You're handcuffing officers to appease criminals and activists." Washington remained calm. "Officer Williams, you're out of order. If you have concerns about the policy, there are appropriate channels." Williams advanced toward the podium, ignoring her response. "You don't belong here. You don't know what it's like on these streets. You're destroying this department to advance your political agenda." His approach became increasingly threatening until several officers, including some who had previously aligned with Mercer, moved to intercept him. As Williams was escorted from the room still shouting obscenities, Washington maintained her composure, continuing the briefing as if the interruption had been minor. Only Captain Chen noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she turned the page of her presentation. That evening, alone in her office, Washington finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, tears silently tracking down her face as she confronted the possibility that the personal cost of this battle might be too high. Her cancer required attention she couldn't give while fighting this war on multiple fronts. Her safety was constantly at risk. The stress was affecting her health even beyond the cancer diagnosis. Was it worth sacrificing herself, perhaps literally, for reforms that might be reversed as soon as she stepped away? The question lingered as she wiped away tears and returned to reviewing evidence files, the answer still unclear, but the work continuing regardless. As Captain Chen meticulously analyzed traffic stop data from the past 5 years, a disturbing pattern emerged that went beyond individual officer bias. Black and Latino drivers were stopped at rates 5 times higher than white drivers overall, but the disparity spiked dramatically in specific neighborhoods at specific times. "Look at these clusters," Chen explained, pointing to a digital map where red dots represented racially disparate stops. They're concentrated in Riverdale Oak Park and the eastern section of downtown, but not consistently. The pattern intensifies during particular 3 to 6 month periods, then shifts to another neighborhood. Washington studied the map recognition dawning. These aren't random. The concentrations follow property development patterns. She pulled up city planning records, overlaying them with Chen's map. The correlation was undeniable. Aggressive policing of minorities spiked in neighborhoods shortly before major property purchases by development companies. Further investigation revealed that the largest developer, Westlake Ventures, was owned primarily by Robert Barrett, Councilman Howard Barrett's brother. They're using the police department to drive down property values, Washington realized. Targeted harassment and over-policing makes an area appear unsafe. Property values drop, and developers swoop in to buy at bargain prices before gentrifying and selling at massive profits. Chen nodded grimly. And guess who sits on the board of Westlake Ventures as a security consultant with significant stock options? Former Chief Donahue. The financial trail led deeper. Washington obtained warrants to examine bank records revealing monthly payments from a shell company called Municipal Security Consultants to several officers, including Mercer Williams and Peterson. The shell company in turn received funding from Westlake Ventures and 3 other development firms active in the city. Even more disturbing was the discovery of similar payments to city manager Victor Hargrove's personal account, carefully disguised as consulting fees. "This isn't just about racist cops," Washington told Agent Kennedy during a secure call. "It's systematic corruption involving the police department, city government, and private businesses working together to profit from discriminatory practices." Kennedy's response was immediate. "This elevates the situation. I can have a full FBI team assigned within 48 hours. This is now a public corruption investigation, not just a civil rights matter." The scope of the conspiracy explained the intensity of the pushback Washington had encountered. She wasn't just threatening individual officers' careers. She was disrupting a highly profitable criminal enterprise that had operated unchallenged for years. Her predecessor, she learned, had resigned after receiving death threats when he began questioning financial irregularities in the department budget that might have exposed the scheme. While the investigation expanded, unexpected help arrived from an unlikely source. Madison Mercer contacted Washington through a secure email address the chief had established for anonymous tips. "I need to meet you somewhere private," the teenager wrote. "I have recordings of my dad and other officers you should hear." They met at a coffee shop in Lakewood, Madison, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses despite the warm weather. She handed Washington a Wabi drive. "After you suspended my dad, he had officers coming to the house all the time. I started recording their conversations." Her voice trembled slightly. "I always thought my dad was a hero. Now I know he's been hurting people, deliberately targeting them because of their race-planting evidence. He even laughed about it." The recordings provided crucial evidence directly linking Mercer to the broader conspiracy. In one particularly damning conversation, Mercer and Sergeant Peterson discussed which neighborhoods were on the cleanup list for the coming month, with explicit references to making areas uncomfortable for the wrong element to help Barrett's investment strategy. Another recording captured Mercer instructing junior officers on how to conduct stops without explicit racial language in their reports, while still targeting minorities exclusively. Madison wiped away tears as Washington thanked her. "Will my dad go to prison?" she asked, the conflict evident in her expression, still loving the father she had known while despising the man he had revealed himself to be. Washington answered honestly, "That depends on the extent of his crimes and whether he cooperates with the investigation. I can't promise leniency, but his cooperation would be considered." As Madison left, Washington was struck by the courage it took for the teenager to turn against her own father for the sake of justice. It reinforced her determination to see the investigation through, regardless of personal cost. The investigation gained further momentum when Officer Rodriguez regained consciousness after 2 weeks in medically induced coma. Though still severely injured, he provided a formal statement identifying Officers Williams and Peterson as his attackers, describing how they had ambushed him in the parking garage while making explicit references to his disloyalty in cooperating with Washington's investigation. The attack on Rodriguez, combined with Madison's recordings and the financial evidence, gave Washington enough leverage to convince a judge to approve surveillance warrants for the primary suspects. The conspiracy began unraveling faster as monitored conversations revealed participants scrambling to cover their tracks, unaware that their communications were being recorded. Washington's success came with escalating personal danger. Returning home late one night, she barely avoided catastrophe when her car's brake lines, which she had taken to checking regularly, had been cut. The incident convinced her to accept Agent Kennedy's offer of federal protection, with FBI agents discreetly monitoring her home and movements. Despite these precautions, she maintained her public presence, refusing to show fear or retreat from her duties. City Manager Hargrove, sensing the walls closing in, made a desperate attempt to remove Washington before she could complete her investigation. He called an emergency closed session of the City Council, citing insubordination and dereliction of duty as grounds for terminating her appointment. Chief Washington has created a hostile work environment, undermined department morale, invited unnecessary federal oversight, and compromised public safety with her political agenda. Hargrove argued to the council members. For the good of Westlake, she must be removed immediately. The vote was scheduled for the following evening, giving Washington less than 24 hours to counter the move. As she drove home, considering her limited options, her secure phone pinged with an encrypted message from an anonymous source. "Check your email. Password Westlake 2020. The attached files contained years of communications between Hargrove, the Barrett brothers, and former Chief Donahue, explicitly detailing their scheme to use the police department for financial gain through targeted harassment and property manipulation. Most damning were records of bribes paid to officials across multiple city departments to facilitate the conspiracy. Washington forwarded everything to Agent Kennedy, then began preparing for the council vote that would determine not only her future, but the possibility of justice for those who had suffered under the corrupt system she was fighting to dismantle. Do you think there are corrupt systems like this operating in real cities across America? Comment number 1. If you believe police departments sometimes work with powerful interests to control and profit from vulnerable communities, or comment. Number 2, if you think most law enforcement agencies operate with integrity despite individual bad actors. Like and subscribe to follow Chief Washington's battle against this deeply entrenched corruption network as the walls close in around the conspirators. What desperate measures might they take to protect themselves? Will Washington's health concerns force her to compromise her investigation, and how many others in positions of power might be implicated as the full extent of the corruption is revealed? Armed with the explosive evidence from her anonymous source, Chief Washington chose a strategic approach rather than immediately exposing everything. The morning before the emergency council vote, she requested individual private meetings with council members, carefully selecting which pieces of evidence to share with each based on her assessment of their potential alliance. With Councilwoman Diane Jackson, who had consistently supported police reform. Washington shared the full financial records showing Hargrove's connection to the property scheme. "This goes beyond police misconduct," Washington explained. "This is systematic corruption that has victimized our most vulnerable communities while enriching a select few." Jackson, visibly shaken by the evidence, pledged her support and agreed to help sway other council members. With Councilman Michael Rivera, who had remained publicly neutral but privately expressed concerns about Washington's approach, she shared the recordings of officers explicitly discussing discriminatory tactics. Rivera's expression hardened as he listened to Mercer instructing officers to target suspicious individuals using coded language for racial profiling. "My son is 22, Rivera said quietly when the recording ended. "He's been stopped by Westlake PD 7 times in the past year. Never ticketed, just harassed. I always told him to be respectful, follow instructions, not make trouble. I never considered—" His voice trailed off, the personal impact of the systematic discrimination finally registering. By the time the emergency session convened that evening, Washington had secured enough support to postpone the vote indefinitely, citing the ongoing federal investigation into possible criminal conduct by city officials, including Hargrove himself. Hargrove's face contorted with barely contained rage as his carefully orchestrated plan collapsed. "This isn't over," he muttered as he brushed past Washington after the meeting adjourned. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Washington's voice was calm but carried clearly in the near-empty chamber. "Actually, Mr. Hargrove, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Every name, every transaction, every communication. The question is whether you understand the consequences of what you've done." Back at the department, Washington began identifying potential allies within the rank's officers who might have remained silent out of fear rather than complicity. Officer Sharon Douglas, a 25-year veteran nearing retirement, approached Washington privately. "Not everyone in this department is corrupt, Chief," Douglas said, her weathered face reflecting years of witnessing the department's transformation. "Some of us have been waiting for someone like you, someone willing to clean house." Douglas provided Washington with invaluable insights about which officers might be redeemable and which were too deeply enmeshed in the corruption. Based on this information, Washington implemented a brilliantly orchestrated sting operation. She prepared 3 different versions of a confidential memo regarding the investigation, each containing specific but slightly different information. These memos were distributed to different groups within the command staff, allowing Washington to identify leaks based on which version of the information reached Hargrove and his associates. The operation successfully identified 3 of Hargrove's informants within the department, including a lieutenant in internal affairs who had been suppressing complaints against Mercer and other corrupt officers for years. Meanwhile, Mercer's situation grew increasingly desperate. Coleman, his attorney, arranged a meeting at Mercer's now disheveled home to discuss the mounting evidence. "They have you on video assaulting Washington, planting evidence, and making explicitly racist statements," Coleman explained, reviewing the case files. "Your daughter has provided recordings that implicate you in systematic misconduct. Rodriguez has identified your associates in his assault, and they'll likely flip on you to save themselves. We need to discuss a plea arrangement while you still have something to offer the prosecution." Mercer, unshaven and reeking of alcohol, despite the early hour, paced his living room like a trapped animal. "No deals. I'm not the only one who played this game. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Hargrove, the Barretts, all of them." Coleman sighed, closing his briefcase. "That attitude is precisely why they'll cut you loose, James. You're a liability now. Think about it. Cooperate, and you might serve 5 years instead of 20. Keep fighting, and you'll lose everything." After Coleman left, Mercer sat in dark silence for hours, nursing a bottle of bourbon and cultivating his resentment. As night fell, he made a fateful decision. Driving to Victor Hargrove's exclusive lakeside home, Mercer bypassed the security gate, using the access code he'd been given years ago when he performed special services for the city manager. Hargrove answered the door in expensive loungewear, his surprise at seeing Mercer quickly transforming to irritation. "You shouldn't be here, James. We can't be seen together right now." Mercer pushed past him into the marble-floored foyer. "That's Rich Victor. Now you're worried about appearances. Where was that concern when you were ordering me to terrorize Riverdale residents so your developer friends could buy properties at half their value?" Hargrove's expression hardened. "Lower your voice, and let's be clear. You were well compensated for your work. Nobody forced you to do anything." Their conversation escalated rapidly, Mercer's desperation colliding with Hargrove's cold calculation. "You promised protection," Mercer shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You said the union would handle any complaints, that the mayor and council had our backs. Now I'm facing prison while you're still sitting pretty in your mansion." Hargrove's composure slipped. "What did you expect? You assaulted the new police chief on camera. Even I can't fix something that stupid. You're on your own, James." The argument turned physical when Mercer grabbed Hargrove's silk lapels, pushing him against an expensive painting. Hargrove clutched suddenly at his chest, his face contorting in pain as he collapsed to the floor. Mercer stood frozen, watching as the city manager gasped for breath, clearly experiencing a severe cardiac event. Instead of calling for help, Mercer's self-preservation instinct kicked in. He fled the scene, leaving Hargrove alone in his remote home. The city manager was found dead the following morning by his housekeeper. What Mercer didn't know was that Hargrove's home security system had captured his visit, and a neighbor's camera had recorded his car entering and leaving the property. Within hours, Mercer was a murder suspect. The revelation presented Washington with an ethical dilemma. Using Hargrove's death to remove Mercer permanently would be expedient, potentially ending one of her biggest problems without the messy process of the ongoing investigation. Yet doing so would compromise the integrity she was fighting to restore to the department. After consulting with Agent Kennedy and Captain Chen, Washington made her decision. "We proceed by the book," she instructed. "Full investigation, proper procedure, no shortcuts. If Mercer's responsible for Hargrove's death, we prove it legitimately. If the medical evidence shows it was a natural heart attack exacerbated by their confrontation, we acknowledge that. We don't become what we're fighting against." This decision, while ethically sound, created further division within the department. Officers who had expected Washington to use any means necessary to achieve her goals were surprised by her insistence on proper procedure, even when it might benefit her adversaries. Some interpreted it as weakness. Others recognized it as the principled leadership the department desperately needed. Washington used the moment to implement broader reforms, including comprehensive community oversight measures and mandatory body camera reviews. In a powerful departmental training session on implicit bias, she took the unprecedented step of sharing her personal experiences with discrimination, both as a civilian and within law enforcement. "I'm not asking you to deny the challenges of policing," she told the assembled officers. "I'm asking you to recognize that those challenges affect different communities in profoundly unequal ways, and that our unconscious biases can lead to devastating consequences for innocent people." Some officers walked out of the training in protest. Others stayed, beginning to understand the perspective their new chief brought to the department. The division between reform-minded officers and those resisting change grew more pronounced. But for the first time, those supporting Washington's vision began speaking out publicly, creating a counterbalance to the old guard's resistance. As the investigation into both Hargrove's death and the broader corruption scheme continued, Washington received unexpected support from community leaders who had initially viewed her with suspicion. Darius Powell organized community meetings to discuss constructive engagement with the Reform Department, while religious leaders from diverse congregations publicly endorsed Washington's approach. The momentum had finally shifted, though Washington knew the hardest battles likely still lay ahead, both professionally and in her private struggle with cancer that remained her closely guarded secret. Mercer's arrest for Hargrove's death sent shockwaves through Westlake's power structure. He was taken into custody without incident, found sitting in his car outside his former family home, staring blankly at the darkened windows where his wife and daughter once welcomed him home. The medical examiner's report released 3 days later complicated the case. While Hargrove had indeed suffered a fatal heart attack, the evidence suggested it was likely triggered by a pre-existing condition rather than directly caused by physical assault. The charges against Mercer were adjusted accordingly, from murder to involuntary manslaughter and criminal negligence for failing to seek medical help. The investigation of Hargrove's home, however, yielded far more significant results than anyone anticipated. Federal agents discovered an encrypted hard drive containing years of incriminating communications with developers. City officials and police leadership. Hargrove, ever the meticulous administrator, had maintained detailed records of every corrupt transaction, apparently as insurance against betrayal. This treasure trove of evidence implicated dozens of individuals across multiple agencies and private businesses, confirming the systematic nature of the corruption Washington had been fighting. Facing this overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his remaining allies, Mercer's defenses crumbled. His attorney negotiated a plea deal requiring comprehensive testimony against everyone involved in the corruption network. "He's singing like a Broadway star," Agent Kennedy informed Washington after Mercer's initial debriefing. "Names, dates, specific instructions, everything. He seems almost relieved to unburden himself." Washington nodded, feeling no satisfaction in Mercer's downfall, only determination to use his testimony to dismantle the entire corrupt system. "Make sure his cooperation is thoroughly documented. His credibility will be attacked by everyone he implicates." With Mercer's cooperation secured and Hargrove's records providing corroboration, Washington implemented department-wide reforms with renewed vigor. The changes were comprehensive: new use-of-force policies, emphasizing de-escalation, mandatory body cameras with strict penalties for deactivation, civilian oversight with real disciplinary authority, implicit bias training led by community members, and redistribution of patrol resources based on actual crime data rather than property values or racial demographics. Each reform faced resistance from entrenched interests. City council meetings became battlegrounds as Washington pushed for policy changes and budget reallocations. Councilman Barrett, increasingly implicated in the corruption investigation through his brother's development company, fought particularly hard against the civilian oversight provisions. "This is nothing short of a hostile takeover of law enforcement by anti-police activists," he argued during one heated session. "Chief Washington is undermining officer morale and public safety to advance a political agenda." Washington responded with data and testimony from community members who had suffered under the previous regime. "The only agenda I'm advancing is constitutional policing that serves all citizens equally," she countered. "The officers with high morale in the new department are those committed to justice and public service, not those who benefited from corruption and discrimination." The Justice Department announced a broader investigation into systematic discrimination across multiple city departments, examining everything from housing code enforcement to small business licensing. The investigation revealed how completely the discrimination had been institutionalized. Black and Latino residents faced higher hurdles for permits, more frequent code violations, and stricter enforcement of minor infractions, all creating barriers to economic advancement and property ownership. Within the police department, several officers resigned rather than adapt to the new standards and accountability measures. Others, however, embraced the changes, particularly younger officers who had been uncomfortable with the old practices but lacked the power or seniority to challenge them. Washington created specialized training opportunities for these officers, identifying future leaders who could sustain reforms beyond her tenure. Throughout this period of intense professional activity, Washington silently battled her personal health crisis. Her cancer treatments began forcing her to balance the physical and emotional challenges of chemotherapy with her demanding responsibilities. On treatment days, she arrived at the department before dawn, working until the appointment, then returning afterward despite exhaustion and nausea. Only Captain Chen knew the full truth covering for Washington during her medical absences and effectively serving as acting chief when needed. "You need to take proper medical leave," Chen urged after finding Washington vomiting in her private bathroom following a particularly difficult treatment. "The department won't fall apart if you step back temporarily." Washington wiped her mouth, straightening her uniform with shaking hands. "I can't show weakness now, Maya. Too many people are looking for any excuse to undermine what we've started." Despite her physical weakness, Washington demonstrated tremendous strength of character, never using her illness as an excuse or allowing it to prevent her from fulfilling her duties. Her resilience earned her increasing respect even from some who had initially opposed her. Community support for Washington's reforms grew steadily. Darius Powell, who had begun as one of her harshest critics, became a cautious ally, organizing community meetings to explain the changes and gather feedback from residents. "She's not perfect," he told a gathering at the Riverdale Community Center, "but she's fighting the right battles and actually listening to the community. That's more than we've ever had before." Officer Rodriguez returned to limited duty 6 weeks after the assault, his right eye permanently damaged, but his determination intact. His presence in the department became a powerful symbol. Officers who had once viewed him as a traitor now saw his moral courage and commitment to genuine public service. Washington created a new specialized unit focused on building community trust, placing Rodriguez alongside community representatives to develop collaborative approaches to neighborhood safety. The department culture shifted gradually, though pockets of resistance remained entrenched, particularly among veterans who had prospered under the old system. The most dramatic development came during Mercer's formal interrogation. After hours of providing specific details about corrupt practices, he finally broke down completely, revealing the full extent of the conspiracy that had infected Westlake for decades. "It wasn't just the police department and developers," he explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion and shame. "There were judges who dismissed cases against certain people and pursued maximum sentences against others based on neighborhood and race. Business leaders who funded campaigns for officials who would maintain the system. Even some church leaders who preached cooperation with authorities while knowing exactly what was happening." His testimony became key to a grand jury investigation that would eventually result in dozens of indictments across every level of Westlake's power structure. As fall turned to winter, Washington received promising news from her oncologist. The treatments were working with significant reduction in the tumor size and no evidence of metastasis. Though the prognosis remained guarded, the immediate health crisis had eased, allowing her to focus more fully on cementing the institutional changes she had begun. In a private moment after receiving this news, Washington stood at her office window, watching snow begin to fall on the city she had committed to transforming. The past months had tested her in ways she couldn't have imagined when accepting the position. She had faced death threats, institutional resistance, betrayal, and her own mortality. Yet standing there watching officers interact respectfully with citizens in the plaza below, she felt the first real sense that permanent change might actually be possible. 1 year after Chief Washington's appointment, the Westlake Police Department had undergone a transformation that few had believed possible. Crime rates, contrary to dire predictions from Washington's critics, had actually decreased by 17% overall. More significantly, civilian complaints against officers had dropped by 63%, while community tips leading to legitimate arrests had increased, demonstrating growing trust between police and the communities they served. New hiring practices had increased diversity within the force, not through lowered standards as opponents had claimed, but by removing artificial barriers and recruiting actively in previously underrepresented communities. The department now more closely reflected the city it served with officers who understood the neighborhoods they patrolled. Washington had survived her cancer treatments, emerging with short-cropped hair that she chose not to conceal with wigs, a visible reminder of her battle. Though still thinner than before her illness and sometimes visibly tired, her health had stabilized with recent scans showing no evidence of disease. The experience had left her with a renewed sense of purpose and urgency, a visceral understanding that time was precious and change couldn't wait for perfect conditions. The legal consequences of the corruption investigation had been far-reaching. Mercer, having provided valuable testimony against more powerful figures, received a relatively light sentence. 6 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation and permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. Councilman Barrett faced multiple federal charges related to corruption, bribery, and civil rights violations. His brother Robert's development company was under investigation for fraud and racketeering. 2 local judges had been removed from the bench and disbarred for systematically discriminating against minority defendants while dismissing charges against politically connected individuals. The city had established a reparations program for victims of police misconduct and discriminatory practices, providing financial compensation and formal apologies to those whose lives had been damaged by the corrupt system. The program, while inadequate to fully address decades of harm, represented an unprecedented acknowledgment of institutional wrongdoing. Officer Rodriguez had been promoted to lead the department's Community Relations Division, his personal experience of both standing against corruption and suffering the consequences, making him uniquely qualified to rebuild trust between police and citizens. Captain Chen now headed internal affairs with real authority, ensuring that complaints were thoroughly investigated rather than buried. The spring brought Westlake's annual community festival, traditionally held in the city's Central Park, but expanded this year to include Riverdale, a neighborhood previously excluded from city celebrations. Washington attended in uniform, walking comfortably among residents who now greeted her with genuine respect rather than fear or suspicion. Children played games organized by community officers, their parents engaging casually with police who had become familiar, trusted figures rather than threatening outsiders. "You've done something remarkable here." Darius Powell commented, joining Washington as she observed the festivities. "Not perfect, but meaningful." Washington smiled, watching Officer Douglas organize a basketball game between officers and local teenagers. "It's a start. Systems don't change overnight, but they do change if enough people demand it and work for it consistently." Powell nodded toward a young woman approaching them. "Speaking of change," Madison Mercer, now 18 and graduated from high school, looked nothing like the frightened teenager who had secretly recorded her father's incriminating conversations. She carried herself with new confidence, her expression open rather than guarded. "Chief Washington, do you have a minute?" Washington excused herself from Powell and walked with Madison to a quieter area near the community center. "I wanted to tell you personally," Madison began. "I've been accepted to the police academy. I start training in September." Washington studied the young woman with surprise. "After everything with your father, you still want to enter law enforcement." Madison's expression remained resolute. "Because of everything with my father. I've seen the worst of what policing can be, but I've also seen what it can become under the right leadership. I want to be part of building something better." Washington felt unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "The academy isn't easy, and carrying your name will bring additional challenges." Madison nodded. "I know, but I also know I can make a difference. You showed me that one person with integrity can change an entire system." As Madison rejoined her friends, Washington reflected on the unpredictable ripple effects of the past year's struggles. The evening culminated in a community awards ceremony where Powell, to Washington's surprise, presented her with a leadership recognition. Chief Washington came to Westlake as an outsider and experienced firsthand the discrimination that many of us have faced for generations, Powell told the gathered crowd. Instead of seeking personal vengeance, she chose systematic justice. The work is far from complete, but she has shown us what real leadership and accountability look like. Washington accepted the simple plaque, uncomfortable with personal recognition, but understanding its symbolic importance for the community. Later that night, she visited her oncologist for a scheduled follow-up appointment, receiving concerning news that blood markers suggested a possible recurrence of her cancer. Additional tests would be needed, and the possibility of more aggressive treatment loomed. Despite this shadow over her future, Washington returned to the celebration, joining community members in a spontaneous dance circle embodying the bridge between police and public that had seemed impossible just a year earlier. The following morning, driving to headquarters Washington, passed a gas station where a familiar figure in an employee uniform was changing the prices on the roadside sign. James Mercer, released from jail but unable to find work in law enforcement or security, had taken one of the few jobs available to someone with his record. Their eyes met briefly as Washington waited at the intersection, mutual recognition of how completely their roles had reversed. There was no satisfaction in seeing her former persecutor reduced to such circumstances, only a somber acknowledgment of justice's complex nature. Washington continued driving, focused not on the past, but on the challenges ahead. That afternoon, her secure phone rang with an unexpected call. The governor's office was considering her for appointment as state attorney general, offering an opportunity to expand her reforms statewide. The position would mean leaving the department she had worked so hard to transform, but it would also allow her to address systemic issues at a higher level, potentially benefiting millions rather than thousands. As sunset painted Westlake's skyline in hues of orange and gold, Washington stood on her porch, contemplating this unexpected crossroads. Her phone buzzed with text messages from Captain Chen about ongoing cases, from her oncologist about scheduling additional tests, from community leaders about upcoming initiatives. The demands never ceased, the work never complete. Yet, looking at the stars emerging in the darkening sky, Washington felt something that had been absent during her darkest days: genuine hope that meaningful change was not only possible but already underway. Her decision about the Attorney General position could wait until morning. For now, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction in how far they had come, while acknowledging the long road still ahead. What would you do in Chief Washington's position? Would you accept the Attorney General role to create broader change, or stay with the department to ensure the reforms take root? Comment below with your thoughts. If you found Chief Washington's journey inspiring, please like and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person with integrity can stand against corrupt systems and make a real difference. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story. Remember that in your own community, you too can be an agent of positive change. This story illustrates profound truths about justice, courage, and institutional change. First, systemic discrimination rarely exists in isolation. It's often intertwined with economic interests and power structures that profit from inequality. Second, meaningful reform requires not just identifying bad apples, but addressing the entire orchard, the systems, policies, and cultural norms that enable misconduct. Third, true leadership demands moral courage and personal sacrifice. Washington risked her safety career and even prioritized justice over her health to create lasting change. Fourth, transformation is possible but never easy. Entrenched systems fight back fiercely when challenged. Fifth, allies can emerge from unexpected places like Madison Mercer and Officer Rodriguez, proving that integrity can transcend personal relationships and institutional pressure. Sixth, accountability must be consistent and apply to everyone, regardless of rank or position. Finally, the story reminds us that while justice systems can be corrupted to perpetuate discrimination, they can also be reformed to protect all citizens equally when led with integrity and transparency. Real change requires both bold leadership from the top and grassroots support from communities. The path to justice is never straight or simple, but with persistence and moral clarity, even the most entrenched systems of discrimination can be dismantled. What systems of inequality have you witnessed in your own community, and what small steps could you take to challenge them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Has someone in your life ever shown the kind of moral courage Chief Washington displayed? Tell us their story. If this narrative about standing against injustice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on social justice issues and the heroes fighting for change. And if you know someone who needs inspiration to stand up against discrimination in their workplace or community, share this video with them. Sometimes seeing courage modeled helps us find our own. Thank you for joining us for this journey of transformation. Remember, as Chief Washington demonstrated, one person with integrity and determination can be the catalyst that begins to dismantle even the most deeply entrenched systems of injustice.